Three chilling accounts carry us from the trails of Redwood National Park, where a hunter stumbles on a skull unlike any other, to the mist-drenched falls of Sequoia, where a lone camper comes face to face with a towering shadow beneath the trees. And finally, high in Yosemite's granite domain, an unsuspecting traveler records a series of bone-rattling screams that defy earthly explanation. Each story is a puzzle piece in a larger mystery, a reminder that even in our most revered landscapes, the line between the known and the unknown can vanish beneath the twilight. I'm not the easiest person to rattle, but I have to get this off my chest because I've been turning it over and over in my head for the last few weeks. You can call me Lou, though that's not my real name. I'm from Crescent City, and I practically grew up roaming the Redwood National Park region. My dad taught me how to track deer there when I was barely big enough to hold a rifle. I usually hunt for black-tailed deer or the occasional feral pig around the northern part of the park, in that border area close to where the Klamath River meets the ocean. Beautiful country. My father used to tell me stories of the local Yurok tribe and their beliefs about forest spirits. As a kid, I thought those were just colorful legends. But after what I found, let's just say I'm now more open to the idea that there might be forces in those trees that don't belong in the everyday world. A few months ago, late autumn around the third week of October, I was hunting alone near an old logging road that locals refer to simply as the Broken Spur. It's not on most maps anymore, but if you're from the area, you know where it is. Weather was changing that day, thick fog rolling in off the coast, the kind that clings to your jacket and makes you wonder if you're not alone. I remember checking my phone. 5:47 p.m. But it felt way later because the sun was dropping behind the tall stands of evergreens. That's when I found the remains. At first, I noticed what looked like several large bones scattered along a hidden ravine, maybe 15 feet below that old path. Now I'm not squeamish. I've dressed out deer. I've even cleared out the occasional predator from farmland in my youth, so bones don't usually make me nervous. But these bones, there was something different about them. The skull in particular, bigger than a human, but shaped strangely. I've seen bear skulls, mountain lion skulls, elk, deer, you name it. And I can tell you, from the slope of the forehead to the eye socket shape, it wasn't any of those. It almost resembled a gorilla's skull, but not quite. We don't have gorillas wandering Redwood National Park, so I don't know what the heck I was looking at. Let me pause here to say I nearly talked myself out of going down to inspect it more closely. It's not the easiest or safest thing, sliding down to a narrow ravine with a loaded rifle slung over your shoulder. But my curiosity got the better of me. The air down there was stifling, even in the open. I recall how my entire body felt colder as I approached the remains. Now maybe it was just my nerves, but it seemed as though a quiet fell over the forest. The only sound was my pulse hammering in my ears. Looking closer, the skull was bigger than a man's head by a good margin. I'd guess at least a quarter or half bigger in volume. The jawline was wide, the teeth looked a bit more like ours than a bear's or a cat's, and the eye sockets, they seemed forward-facing, not on the sides. My first wild thought was, this might be that mythical Bigfoot everyone around here whispers about. But that's not something you just say out loud to yourself. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Then I realized that under the decaying leaves and half buried in the dirt, there appeared to be more scattered remains, ribs, vertebrae, something that might have been a broken femur. There were signs that something had rummaged through them, possibly scavengers, coyotes, or maybe a black bear. But the weird part was the arrangement. Some bones looked intentionally piled as though someone had been messing with them or collecting them. I was so fixated on trying to figure out the shape that I didn't notice how the wind had picked up. By the time I did, I also realized it was going to get dark in a hurry. And I started feeling this intense pressure, that sensation you get in a place you're not supposed to be in. Reminded me of the time as a teenager when I stumbled onto an abandoned campsite people said belonged to some weird cult. There was just that intangible heaviness in the air. I decided to take a few pictures, but my phone was almost dead and refused to capture anything clearly in the dim light. The flash made everything look washed out, and my hands were shaking so bad I doubt I could have gotten a steady shot anyway. This is the part that might sound unbelievable. About 10 yards away from that skull, I saw an old set of footprints in the soft ground, bigger than any shoe size I've encountered, and definitely bigger than mine. I wear a size 12. The prints looked old, but they were still visible enough to notice 5 distinct toes, so if these belonged to a person, they'd have to be extremely tall and broad. If they belonged to a bear, well, it sure didn't match a typical bear track. The stride between footprints was a bit too wide as well. As I was about to make my way back up, I recall hearing a muffled snapping sound in the brush. You know that feeling when your stomach sinks and you get hyper-aware of every little movement? My peripheral vision was telling me I wasn't alone. I could sense something or someone at the top of the ridge, though I couldn't see them. I didn't exactly want to wait around and find out what it was. I practically clawed my way back up, got to the path, and listened. The snapping turned into rustling, and then quiet. In that moment, every childhood ghost story about Redwood National Park came roaring back into my mind. A handful of days later, I told a buddy from Erie about what I saw. He's a local fisherman with a knack for tall tales, so I wasn't sure if he'd believe me. But in indirect words, he said he'd heard talk from a park ranger a few months earlier of unclassified remains being found deep off trail. That ranger apparently got transferred pretty quickly, which stirred up rumors. Some folks started speculating about logging company cover-ups, others whispered about government involvement. My friend said, in his own way, that Redwood National Park has always been thick with the unexplained. I'd intended to go back, but I couldn't find the exact spot on subsequent trips. The forest can be like that, shifting, changing, especially in the heavier rainfall months. One day, you swear you know a route by heart, and the next, it's like the trail vanished or the landscape rearranged itself. I even asked around with a few folks I trust, another friend who hunts, a retired ranger living near Klamath. Some of them mentioned hearing distant howls at night. Others talked about seeing huge, shadowy shapes moving between the redwoods at dusk. And one older fellow confided in me that he'd seen something he described as a walking bear 5 years ago, an hour's drive southeast of Crescent City. If you press them for more details, they tend to clam up, but the undertone is always the same. We're messing in territory that might not belong to us. I haven't told many people about what I discovered, partly out of fear that folks will call me crazy, and partly because I don't want to be the one who leads a stampede of thrill seekers out there. But if you happen to be trekking through Redwood National Park, keep your eyes and ears open. The official line is that we have black bears, elk, mountain lions, but they don't talk about anything else. Even so, I have this unshakable feeling there's something out in those woods. And if you come across it, or if it comes across you, well, let's just say you might get more than you bargained for. Stay safe and be careful. Sometimes the forest hides secrets it would rather keep buried. Picture yourself venturing beneath the towering sequoias of California, lulled by the rush of a waterfall that sparkles in the moonlight. A camper, armed with little more than a tent, a sense of adventure, and an appetite for solitude, soon finds that something else stirs in those woods. And once you've heard their story, you might think twice before pitching your tent too far from the trail. I've been debating all morning about sending this in, but if I don't get it out there, I'm never going to sleep again. My name's Keith. Coincidental, I know, and I'm a pretty avid camper. I've spent years exploring different parts of California, always drawn to the rugged beauty of our national parks. Sequoia National Park in particular has a special place in my heart, so when I got a chance to head up there in early June, I jumped on it. I arrived on a Saturday afternoon at the Lodgepole Campground, snagged one of the last available sites, and immediately set off for a short hike toward Niagara Falls. Some folks say it's among the most scenic waterfalls in that corner of the park. The path was still damp from late spring snowmelt, and the air was crisp, scented with pine and that unique wet earth smell you only get in mountainous areas. The plan was to do a little day hike, then come back to camp before dark and maybe roast a couple of hot dogs or something. Just me, the stars, and the comforting roar of the nearby marble fork of the Sequoia River. I ended up staying a bit too late at the falls, mostly because I lost track of time trying to photograph the rainbows forming in the mist. By the time I started heading back, the sun was sinking behind those colossal sequoias. The forest feels different at dusk, especially among those giant trees, like you've stepped into an ancient cathedral with no one else around. Except I realized I wasn't alone when I heard a very distinct crack of a branch not far off trail. I remember stopping short and thinking maybe it was just a bear. But the next noise sounded more like something heavy exhaling, almost a low grunt or moan. And I quickly thought, that's not a bear I'm used to hearing. I tried to ignore it, picking up my pace. When I reached my campsite, everything looked normal at first. My tent was undisturbed, my small cooler still latched, but a sense of unease clung to me. There was this thick, tense quiet in the area, as if everything else in the woods had decided to stop making a sound. I figured I was just spooked from that weird noise, so I tried to calm down, lit a small fire, and heated up some dinner. Later that night, had to be around 10:30 or 11, I was lying in my tent, listening to the constant rush of water in the distance. At some point, I dozed off. Out of nowhere, I was awakened by what I can only describe as deep, guttural breathing right outside the tent. Not a snort like a deer or the huff of a bear. It sounded more purposeful, like something that wanted me to know it was there. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might burst. I dared not even unzip the tent because the fear that washed over me was paralyzing. I could see, through the thin fabric, a tall shadow cast by my dying fire. The silhouette looked massive, towering. I must have laid there for minutes, but it felt like forever. I kept expecting this thing to move along, but it just stood there, occasionally shifting its weight. Then I noticed the faint smell, something foul, like wet fur and decaying vegetation. If you've ever been to a farm with old, stale hay, it was a bit like that, but more pungent. My mind started racing. I'd heard stories of Bigfoot sightings in these parts, but always dismissed them as nonsense or tall tales for tourists. And yet here I was, lying inches from something that definitely wasn't your average black bear. I remembered hearing about local rumors. Some folks in the nearby town of Three Rivers talk about strange sightings near the Sequoia River corridor, especially in years with heavier rainfall. I guess they figure the thick underbrush and plentiful water might draw in all sorts of wildlife. But I also recalled reading an old story in a visitor center pamphlet that mentioned a large, bipedal creature spotted decades ago around this same area. The ranger on duty brushed it off as a local legend, focusing instead on safety tips for bears and rattlesnakes. Eventually, I heard this creature shuffle around the campsite, knocking something over, possibly my little camp chair or the fire ring grate. Then there was a peculiar, quiet grunt again, and suddenly the sound of heavy footsteps moving toward the undergrowth. I stayed frozen, trying to will my heart to slow down. I don't know exactly how long I waited, but after a while, I found the nerve to peer outside. My small fire had gone down to embers, the moonlight illuminating the trees just enough to see vague shapes. Nothing. Silence except for the waterfall in the distance. I barely slept that night, so come morning, I stepped out of the tent to look around. The camp chair was definitely flipped, and the back of it had a strange smear, kind of like a muddy handprint, only bigger than my own. My pack was still in place, but the side pocket was open, like it had been rummaged through. The ground was too rocky for clear footprints, but there were some deep impressions near a damp patch of soil behind my tent. Each impression looked somewhat elongated, not like a typical bear paw. I had to gather myself because seeing that made all the fear from the night before come rushing back. I packed up fast. On my way out, I passed another camper, an older man in a green flannel who'd been up since daybreak. Indirectly, he mentioned hearing strange cries during the night, figuring it might be a wildcat or coyote. I just nodded, not sure I wanted to talk about the possibility that we had something else creeping through the campground. And the weird part is, after I got back home, I learned from a coworker who grew up near Visalia that there have been covered-up sightings of a massive bipedal figure around that general region for years. People are scared to say much because they don't want the park to become overrun with thrill seekers or ridiculed by skeptics. I'm telling this story because I want folks to know I genuinely believe there's something out there. Whatever I heard and saw that night was beyond anything I'd experienced in all my years of camping, almost like it was sizing me up or studying the campsite. If anyone else out there has had a similar encounter in Sequoia National Park, I'd really like to know I'm not alone. The granite giants of Yosemite, their ancient faces towering above the valley floor, a place where millions come seeking nature's majesty and a rare moment of tranquility. But what if, instead, an unsuspecting camper found themselves capturing something so unearthly and disturbing that it would forever change how they saw those peaceful forests? Welcome to a story of unsettling echoes in the Californian wild. I'm a Los Angeles native, born and raised in Eagle Rock, though I've always considered Yosemite National Park my second home. I've taken more trips up there than I can count, mostly weekend getaways to places like Camp 4 or Upper Pines, sometimes venturing deeper into the backcountry when I'm feeling adventurous. I've heard plenty of the usual sounds one might expect out in the wilderness: bears rustling through undergrowth, the wind howling at Glacier Point, coyotes calling out under a pale moon. But in all my years, I've never heard anything like what I recorded just a few weeks ago. I was up near the Mist Trail, not too far from Vernal Fall, making my way toward the top late in the afternoon. I have this weird habit of starting hikes in the late day because I love to watch the sunset across the valley. This time, I got delayed by a bit of a jam near the steps. Some folks taking pictures, a couple of kids who slipped on the wet rock. By the time I reached the top, the light had changed to that golden hue that makes everything look surreal. I figured I'd pitch my small one-person tent somewhere close, not in an official campsite per se, but a quiet spot that I scouted on a previous trip. It wasn't exactly legal, so I won't be too specific. Let's just say it was off the beaten path enough that I had good cover among some boulders. That night, I was making dinner, a simple freeze-dried meal, when I thought I heard something echoing off the canyon walls, distant but sharp enough to catch my attention. It sounded almost like a high-pitched wail, but it ended in this guttural, throaty finish that made me freeze in place. My first instinct was maybe it was a mountain lion, but I've heard mountain lion screams before, terrifying enough in their own right, and this was different. It echoed in a way that sent chills running up my spine. I tried to brush it off as just an odd sound or maybe a weird bird call. About an hour later, it started again, only closer. I scrambled for my phone, figuring I might as well record it in case it was some unusual wildlife or something I could identify later. While I was fumbling to open my recording app, I realized that the forest had gone dead silent around me. No night insects, no rustling in the nearby bushes, nothing. That alone put me on edge. Finally, I managed to hit record just as another scream pierced the night. Listening through my headphones after the fact, I could still feel that same wave of dread. The pitch rose and then dropped like it was coming from some massive chest cavity. I can only compare it to a wolf or a coyote that's been given an amplifier, but that still doesn't quite describe the weird layered tone it had. I was shaken enough to abandon the idea of a peaceful night's sleep out there. I didn't exactly want to risk an encounter with whatever was making those noises. Maybe I should have packed up and hiked down, but that trail is treacherous in the dark, especially near the falls. So instead, I hunkered down, hoping that my tent and a good measure of caution would keep me safe until morning. I spent hours lying awake, hearing that same call, sometimes further away, sometimes echoing like it was right across the canyon. I never spotted anything, not even with my flashlight, though I was half afraid I'd see eyes reflecting back at me if I looked hard enough. Come daybreak, I practically flew down the trail, not bothering to eat breakfast. Along the way, I bumped into a couple from the Bay Area who looked startled as I passed by. In their own words, they mentioned hearing loud screeches echoing from somewhere above them in the night, and they had no idea what it was. We all had that wide-eyed look of shared confusion, and maybe fear. This made me realize I wasn't just imagining things. There truly was something screaming in those woods. Once I got back to my car near Curry Village, I tried to calm my nerves. I stopped at the village store for a cup of coffee, browsed around just to settle down. Not surprisingly, if you casually mention hearing strange calls in Yosemite, you mostly get chuckles or folks telling you it was probably a raccoon or a fisher cat. But I let a friend of mine, a fellow from Oakhurst who's been a seasonal worker, listen to my recording. His eyes went wide, and he said that he'd heard rumors from the rangers about unnatural-sounding screams near the backcountry, but they never acknowledged them publicly. Some folks blame it on cougars, others whisper about cryptid creatures or leftover legends of the Ahwahneechee people who once inhabited the valley. I'm not jumping to claim it's Bigfoot or a skinwalker or anything specific. I'm just saying, if you heard the audio I captured, you'd have second thoughts about what roams the shadows of Yosemite. I tried searching online, but the best I got were theories about wendigos or unidentified forest creatures. And as skeptical as I usually am, that night made me wonder just how many corners of these national parks remain unexplored, and how many mysteries remain unsolved. Now, I still love Yosemite, but every time I remember those screams echoing off the canyon walls, I get a tight feeling in my chest. I've shared the audio with a few close friends, but I'm hesitant to post it publicly because I know the wave of skepticism and ridicule that might follow. If there's anyone else out there who's heard similar sounds or encountered something bizarre in the park, I'd be curious to know. Because I can't help but think there's more out there than just the usual wildlife, and I was unlucky, or maybe lucky, enough to catch a glimpse of it in the form of those unearthly screams. Be careful if you're camping in remote spots near the falls or anywhere off-trail. We like to think we're alone out there, but this experience taught me we might have company of a kind we're not ready to understand. And so, amid the granite domes and cascading waters of Yosemite, a camper from LA found more than just peace and quiet in the moonlit forest. Terrifying, echoing screams that defy simple explanation, echoes of something primal, or simply the cries of nature misunderstood. Sometimes our beloved parks hide secrets as old as the mountains themselves. Two haunting accounts from opposite ends of the country, yet bound by the same bone-chilling thread. One, born in the misty shadows of Washington's towering evergreens, the other taking shape in the brooding depths of Pennsylvania's ancient woodland. Each teller thought they knew the forest, that they'd heard every snap and growl that the wild could offer, until they came face to face with the unimaginable. Let's follow these two nightmarish trails into the unknown. I finally decided I can't keep this bottled up. I'm originally from Spokane, Washington, so I've been camping and hiking around the Pacific Northwest my whole life. I thought I knew these forests. I thought I'd seen every type of wildlife you could imagine, like grizzlies in Glacier National Park and cougars prowling the outskirts of Coeur d'Alene. I even heard the distant call of wolves out near Okanogan. But I'm telling you, I have never experienced anything like what happened to me just last month in Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. I was up there around mid-October, technically off-season for most casual campers, but I liked the quieter spots in the fall. The weather had been weirdly warm during the day but dropped to near freezing at night. I set up a small campsite near Baker Lake, thinking I'd do a bit of trout fishing the next morning. I'd arrived late in the afternoon, so by the time the tent was pitched, the sun was already dipping behind the pines. It was a Tuesday, October 18th to be exact, and there were hardly any other campers or hikers around. The ranger I bumped into on the way said something about a possible storm rolling in. Now, I want to mention something seemingly trivial, but it still unnerves me when I think about it. On my drive up to the trailhead, I passed an old man standing by his beat-up Ford truck on the side of the forest road. He was wearing this ratty flannel jacket, looked like he'd been out there for a while, and he waved me down. He never directly asked for help, he just sort of stared, and I couldn't make sense of his expression. He tilted his head like he was trying to hear a distant sound. When I rolled down my window to see if he was okay, he gestured vaguely up the road as if something was waiting for me. Then he just tapped the side of my car, walked off into the underbrush, and disappeared. I brushed it off as maybe he was just a local who liked messing with out-of-towners. But now I wonder if he was trying to warn me. That night, around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps circling my tent. Not just scurrying like a raccoon or a deer, these were solid thuds, like a large man trudging around. I tried to convince myself it was just an elk or a black bear, but the cadence was wrong. It kept circling, then pausing for way too long, then circling again. At one point, there was this low humming or growling noise, almost mechanical, but mixed with a guttural animal sound. I must have laid there, paralyzed with fear, for a good hour. Around 2:30 a.m., I actually unzipped the tent flap a couple of inches to peek outside. I caught a glimpse of something tall and gaunt, maybe 7 feet, but I couldn't see it clearly. It moved in a flash of pale gray skin, no fur that I could discern. My flashlight was shaking so badly that the beam flickered all over the place, so I didn't get a good look. But I know it was standing on 2 legs, hunched, with elongated limbs. I don't know if you'd call it a crawler or something else entirely, but it was definitely nothing I'd seen in any field guide. When it noticed my flashlight, it let out this short, sharp exhale like air escaping from a broken pipe and darted into the tree line. Everything went dead silent. No crickets, no wind, no rustling leaves. I was too terrified to step out and check for tracks. I just zipped the tent closed and tried to keep from screaming. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it was just a vivid nightmare. But then I noticed a weird chemical-like smell around my campsite. It reminded me of ozone after lightning strikes, or maybe burnt electronics. My fishing line, which I'd left coiled by a rock, was scattered in a spiral pattern, like something had deliberately picked it up and laid it back down in circles. It was surreal. I still thought about packing up and leaving right then, but I'd promised myself at least 2 days of camping. The day was calm, no sign of that thing, so I forced myself to stay. Toward evening, I ran into a pair of hikers, brother and sister from Bellingham, who were on a day trip. They said they'd seen something strange along the trail. The sister told me she'd noticed footprints that looked human but were far too large and spaced in an odd stride. The brother said he spotted a pale figure darting behind a tree, only to vanish when he tried to get closer. They were unnerved enough that they cut their hike short and were heading home. I decided to keep this to myself, but inside, my gut was clenched in terror. That second night was worse. The storm the ranger warned about had rolled in, unleashing torrential rain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the forest in these horrible bursts of white light. Each time it flickered, I thought I saw that thing standing a little nearer. At one point, I was almost certain that thing was perched on a branch, peering down like some twisted gargoyle. My phone battery had drained unexpectedly earlier in the evening. It was at 80% when I'd checked at dinner. So, I couldn't call for help, or even take a picture. It kept dropping to zero no matter what I did. It was almost like an electrical anomaly was happening around me. Eventually, I grabbed my emergency flashlight and started sprinting down the trail in a blind panic. My plan was just to get back to my car, drive to the nearest motel, and figure out if I'd lost my mind. About a mile into the trek, I heard that hum behind me, accompanied by fleeting glances of that lanky figure weaving among the trees. There were points I thought I saw it in multiple places at once, or maybe it just moved impossibly fast. I tripped at least twice, slamming my knees onto gravel and pine needles. The last time I fell, I braced myself for the worst. I was sure this thing was right behind me. That's when I saw two faint beams of light flashlights from a search party, or maybe a group of rangers. They started calling out, asking if anyone was there. Their voices were muffled by the rain. As soon as those lights hit me, I felt a heavy tension lift, and the presence behind me seemed to vanish. They helped me hobble the last quarter mile to the parking area. One of them mentioned they'd been alerted by a pair of day hikers, the brother and sister, who reported seeing a distressed camper who might be in trouble. I was breathing so hard I could barely choke out a "thank you." When I tried to explain what I'd seen, they just nodded politely, like they'd heard every bizarre story under the sun. And that was the strangest part. One of the rangers said they'd had multiple calls about odd sightings in the forest. This past month, pale figures, strange vocalizations, missing time episodes. They didn't confirm or deny anything. They simply looked at each other with these grim expressions and walked me to my car. I wish I could tell you that's the end of the story. But ever since I came home, I've been plagued by nightmares. Sometimes I see that gaunt shape looming outside my bedroom window when I close my eyes. And my nephew swears he heard some weird, static-laced breathing over the line when I tried to call him about a week after the incident. What do you even call something like that? A Wendigo, a skinwalker, a crawler, an interdimensional being. All I know is I've never been so frightened, and I'm not the only one. When I tried looking up local news reports, I found odd references to campers going missing or complaining of strange hums at night. One hiker's note on a trail website mentioned something that looks like a deer but moves like a human, though I didn't find details beyond that vague mention. I can't make any sense of it, and the rescue team wouldn't elaborate. The local ranger station gave me a prepared statement about how wildlife can exhibit unusual behaviors under environmental stress. But this was no bear, no wolf, no normal creature. Maybe there's someone out there who's seen the same thing and can confirm I'm not losing my mind. So what are we to make of this nighttime stalker of the Pacific Northwest? A tall tale spun from the shadows of towering pines, or a genuine brush with something beyond our understanding? Perhaps we'll never know. The next account you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. This email arrived with all the dread and desperation of someone who truly believed they'd seen something beyond the bounds of normal. Something that defies explanation. So settle in, because what follows is a first-hand report of a chilling encounter deep in the Pennsylvania wilderness. I'm still shaking as I type this. I've gone over it 100 times in my head, and I can't make sense of it. My name is Derek, though some friends call me Deke, and I just got back from what was supposed to be a peaceful weekend in the Allegheny National Forest in northwestern Pennsylvania. I'd planned on a simple 2-night camping trip. The biggest threats I'd considered were black bears, maybe a rabid raccoon if I was really unlucky. But that was before I realized something else was out there, stalking me in the dark. I headed in via the Marienville side, off Route 66. I'd pitched my tent at a somewhat secluded spot near the Minister Creek area. Some of you might know it's known for nice rock formations and old-growth hemlocks. It was chilly, but not too bad during the day, maybe in the low 40s, but the nights dropped to near freezing. Nothing unusual at first. I did notice an odd silence around dusk, like the forest just went dead quiet. But I shrugged it off, thinking maybe the cold weather had already driven most of the wildlife into deeper cover. I swear the only reason I decided to share this with the YouTube channel crowd is because of how indescribably terrifying it got on the second night. The first night, I heard some weird rustling around 2 a.m. That's not unusual. Squirrels, raccoons, deer, all sorts of critters are active at night. But something about this rustling was heavier, more deliberate. Sounded like it was pacing around the perimeter of my sight. I kept my flashlight within reach and tried to sleep, but it was impossible. At dawn, I poked around and found footprints in the mud about 50 feet from my tent. They were large and oddly shaped, almost like a dog's paw print, but elongated. Not to mention, they sank deeper into the ground than a normal animal track would. I snapped a couple of photos on my phone, no idea if they turned out clearly, but I'm pretty sure they were bigger than my hand spread out. I told myself it could be a big coyote, or maybe a stray dog with some unusual gait, but I was rattled. The last time I saw prints that big was, well, never. I tried to calm down, spent the day hiking a loop trail near the creek. Around 3 p.m., I ran into another hiker, older guy wearing a battered camo jacket, who said he'd seen something weird out in the trees. He didn't go into detail, just mumbled something about they come out when it's cold, and left me standing there scratching my head. By then, the overcast skies were rolling in, and I knew I had to start heading back before dark. I didn't see anyone else on the trail. That second night, this is when everything went sideways. It was probably close to midnight. My campfire had burned down to embers, and I was lying in my sleeping bag trying to drift off. That's when I heard a low growl, like it was right outside my tent wall. It was so close I could practically feel the vibration in my chest. Before I even had a chance to react, I heard heavy footsteps circling around again, only this time they sounded like they were on 2 legs, not 4. I sat there, paralyzed, wondering if maybe a person was messing with me. But then I heard that growl again, deeper, unnatural, not like anything a normal human throat could produce. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent a couple of inches, and tried to look out. I caught the reflection of 2 eyes in the dark. They were high off the ground, almost at the level of my shoulders when I stand up, and they glowed this odd yellowish green. I must have gasped or made some noise because it darted back behind a tree. I stepped out of the tent fully, and that's when I saw it. A silhouette, taller than me. I'm 6'1", with a canine-like head and long arms. It let out a snarl that sounded like a mix of a dog's bark and a human scream. I don't know how else to describe it. Panic took over. I grabbed the bear spray I keep in my pack and started yelling anything I could think of, hoping to scare it off. It didn't run away, though. It just kept pacing, circling around the faint glow of my dying campfire. The scariest moment was when it lunged closer and I could see the outline of its body, muscular but lean, with a weird hunched posture. My flashlight flickered, and I swear it looked like it was grinning. That's the image I can't get out of my head. I bolted. Left half my gear behind, just took my keys, phone, and the bear spray. I tore down the trail, practically blind. You know how in the forest at night, especially in late fall, everything is a tangle of branches and shadows. I tripped every few yards. I could hear this thing chasing me. Its footsteps were heavy, and occasionally I'd hear that growl again, or a snarl that made every hair on my neck stand on end. I have no idea how long I ran. The next thing I remember is stumbling onto Forest Road 131, the gravel road that leads back toward the main highway, and nearly collapsing. A pickup truck eventually came by, an older woman driving who looked as shocked as I was. She helped me into her cab and asked what the heck happened to me. I must have looked insane, covered in dirt and pine needles, panting like a hunted animal. She kept asking if I was hurt, or if someone attacked me, but all I could say was that there was something out there. She offered to drive me straight to the state police barracks near Marianville. I was in such a daze I just nodded. The police took my statement, but I'm sure they thought I was either delirious or lying. They asked if I was under the influence of anything, or if maybe I'd seen a bear or a large wolf. I tried to explain the two-legged posture, the snarling that sounded almost human, but they just gave me that blank, polite stare. One trooper suggested maybe I'd had a run-in with a rabid coyote or a black bear with a deformity, but I could tell none of them truly believed me. They took a report, though, and told me if I wanted to go back for my gear, they'd send an officer with me in the morning. When morning came, we drove out, me and a young officer who seemed more curious than dismissive. We found my campsite torn up, my tent shredded, my cooler knocked over, and fresh prints in the mud. The officer crouched down, measured one of the prints with a tape measure. He looked pale. He said he wasn't sure what could have done that. He took a few photos with his phone. Then he told me he needed to call the station. More officers arrived, including some sort of wildlife specialist. They taped off the area, and I wasn't allowed to stick around. They didn't let me collect anything except my phone charger and a few personal items that were scattered. Everything else was now part of an ongoing investigation, they said. I found out later from a local who runs a small diner just north of Marianville that there have been sightings like this going back decades. Hunters whisper about a dogman roaming these woods. Some call it a cryptid, others call it a shapeshifter. He told me he'd seen plaster casts of footprints that look eerily similar to the ones I found, and that I'm lucky I made it out in one piece. He claimed that a buddy of his spotted something like it years ago near Kinzua Dam, but folks just chalked it up to tall tales. Police can't explain it, or won't. Locals have their theories. Most seem reluctant to talk openly unless they trust you. I've been having nightmares every night since it happened, replaying the moment those glowing eyes locked with mine. I still can't shake the feeling that if that pickup truck hadn't come along when it did, I might have ended up a statistic. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, prowling the forests of Pennsylvania. And the worst part is, I doubt this is the last time it'll make its presence known. So there you have it, another nocturnal encounter in the thick of the Alleghenies, a monstrous figure that defies zoological explanation, a frantic escape into the darkness, and a set of footprints that even local law enforcement can't quite place. The question remains, was it a glimpse into a hidden realm of folklore and cryptids, or simply the fevered imagination of a rattled camper lost in the night? Well now, dear friends, gather around for a trio of tales that might make you think twice about the land you walk upon. Whether it's the windswept dunes of Fire Island or the thunderous brink of Niagara Falls. 3 stories from across New York, each a haunting snapshot of the unknown, a reminder that even the most familiar places can sometimes harbor the most unsettling secrets. This isn't one of those run-of-the-mill tall tales folks spin around a campfire. What you're about to hear is the kind of account that makes you wonder if we've truly discovered all there is to discover in the world. Tonight, our story leads us into the very heart of Saratoga National Historical Park in upstate New York. I've been working as a park ranger at Saratoga National Historical Park for a little over 9 years now, long enough to see nearly everything. Kids sneaking into restricted areas at dusk, hoping for a thrill, clusters of amateur ghost hunters wandering around the old Bemis Heights after hearing local legends, and out-of-towners who haven't the faintest idea about how quickly the weather can shift here. But these typical encounters don't hold a candle to what I saw out there just a few weeks back. It was nearing the end of September, somewhere around the 23rd or 24th. The summer crowds had gradually thinned, leaving the park in one of its quieter phases. I find that time of year fascinating. The transition between lively, bustling days and the sounds and smells of autumn creeping in. The trees were beginning to shed their leaves, piling them in crunchy carpets along the trails. That evening, I was strolling through my usual patrol routes, which sometimes involve checking the grounds near the Schuler house or ensuring no one's camping illegally over by Bemis Heights. It seemed no more eventful than any other night, except for one unsettling detail. The woods were silent. Not the comforting lull of nighttime quiet, but a deeper stillness, as though every creature had evacuated. I headed toward the Barber Wheatfield area, a spot that can turn swampy when the rains come. It's an area steeped in Revolutionary War lore, and sometimes visitors leave small memorabilia or patriotic tokens on the property lines. Now, a few local hikers had warned me about footprints they couldn't explain, long, thin shapes in the mud that looked disturbingly human yet far too big. At first, I dismissed it as a hoax or maybe someone's creative attempt to stir up supernatural rumors. I even joked with my coworker, Janet, about it, telling her that some folks just enjoy scaring themselves. She wasn't so quick to laugh, though, saying that in Schuylerville, rumors fly about mysterious entities roaming the old battlegrounds, clinging like shadows. As I approached a small clearing behind the visitor center, a space that offers a glimpse of the moody autumn sky, I noticed a figure at the far edge. I remember the moon that night being just a sliver in the sky, hardly enough light to see by, but somehow it still illuminated this shape. My first reflex was to assume it was a stray camper, or maybe even one of our reenactor volunteers who had gotten turned around in the darkness. But the longer I looked, the more I realized something was very wrong. This figure stood in a manner that made me uneasy. It swayed gently, like it was off balance or maybe disoriented, but there was this tension in its outline, as if its limbs didn't quite fit together. I tried to call out, ask if they needed help, but my voice failed me. It was as if my body instinctively knew to stay quiet, not to draw attention, because the presence I was looking at wasn't normal. When I finally got close enough for my flashlight beam to flicker over it, I nearly dropped the light. The thing looked human, but in an impossibly distorted way, like someone had stretched its arms just a bit too long and given it a posture more suited to a hunched animal. And that face, pale skin that seemed slick or waxy, and what should have been eyes were these hollow, sunken sockets. I only caught the barest glimpse before it whipped its head in my direction, making a sickening creak like dry branches rubbing together. Now, I consider myself fairly level-headed. I've heard ghost stories since I was a kid, and I typically chalk weird sightings up to an overactive imagination. But that instant, a wave of dread surged through me. I groped for my radio, thinking maybe I could quietly request backup. Yet my thoughts were scrambled, words refused to form. Next thing I knew, I'd taken a step back, snapping twigs beneath my boots. That noise snapped the figure's gaze fully onto me, and in one horrifying lurch, it jerked forward. My mind was racing a mile a minute. I vaguely remembered that the Hudson River lay just a short distance east from there. I'd once been told about drownings or unexplained disappearances in these parts, but that recollection didn't offer any comfort. It just made me panic more. As the figure took that step, I bolted. I didn't even think about it. My legs were moving before I registered the decision. I might have dropped my flashlight. I have a hazy memory of the beam skittering across rocks as I tore away from the clearing. My only clear thought was that I had to get out, get somewhere safe, away from the thing that seemed too bizarre to be real. I can't precisely tell you how long it took me to reach the ranger station. It felt like a lifetime. My lungs burned with every breath, branches slapped my arms and face, and the darkness seemed almost oppressive, pressing down on me. Once inside, I collapsed against the counter, and my coworker, Marcus, stared at me like I'd lost my mind. When I finally sputtered out what had happened, he gave me this look of grave understanding, as if he'd already heard similar tales. I remember him fiddling with some paperwork on his desk, avoiding direct eye contact, as though sharing too many details might invite more trouble. Later, Marcus mentioned that a handful of visitors reported seeing something that might match what I'd encountered. One described a tall, pallid silhouette weaving between the tree trunks over by the old Nielsen farm site. Another said they spotted what looked like a person dragging one leg in a strange gait near the Freeman Farm overlook, vanishing into the gloom. We never officially document these sightings because, well, they never quite fit into any formal report. And on top of that, who wants to be the ranger who files a claim that reads, "Encountered humanoid creature with hollow eyes in the park after nightfall"? That's a quick way to get yourself a reputation or maybe a mandatory evaluation. Truth is, I'm convinced we're dealing with something that's either ancient or deeply tied to the darker layers of this land. I spoke with an older farmer who lives near Stillwater, and he swore he watched a gaunt figure slink across his field late one night, startling his horses into a frenzy. Then there was my friend, a retired state trooper, who told me in hushed tones about a call she handled a few years back, involving a frightened young teenager who claimed to have seen a face that wasn't a face, peering out from behind a fallen tree trunk along the Victory Woods trails. She said the kid was so shaken he refused to leave his house after dark for months. It's enough to make you question whether certain legends aren't just cautionary tales, but real glimpses of what's lurking in the shadows. Whenever I try to reason this out, my mind returns to the fleeting details. That bent posture, the elongated arms, the breathy, rattling exhale it made. It's not something you see in your average ghost or spirit account. I've heard of shapeshifters or cryptid sightings in other parts of the country, like the stories that float around in the Southwest about skinwalkers or the reported dogman sightings in the Midwest. But I never expected anything like that in the heart of upstate New York, especially not in the well-traveled corners of Saratoga National Historical Park. Then again, old land means old secrets, right? The Revolutionary War might have scarred these fields in more ways than one. If negative energy or tragedy can leave behind spiritual echoes, maybe something else can take form in that vacuum. These days, I'm pretty uneasy about patrolling alone, especially once the sun drops below the horizon. There have been nights I've come close to refusing to lock up by myself, though pride keeps me from saying that out loud too often. I can't walk the trails without constantly glancing over my shoulder, certain I'll catch a glimpse of something moving behind the tree line. My coworkers have started to notice. Some shrug it off as nerves, while others give me a sympathetic nod, as if to say they've felt that creeping dread too. But no one wants to bring it out into the open. What I really want is for people to consider that maybe, just maybe, we don't have all the answers. The world is a lot bigger and stranger than we like to pretend. Sure, it's easy to laugh off unexplained stories as hokey folklore or the ravings of an over-imaginative mind. But if you were standing there in the clearing, if you saw that silhouette and felt that cold, tangible fear wash over you, you'd realize some mysteries resist tidy explanations. So, to everyone listening, If you find yourself strolling these grounds when dusk settles in, do yourself a favor and pay attention to every sudden stillness, every shadow that seems just a touch too tall. I'm not saying you should panic, but being cautious might save you a lifetime of questions, or worse. This place, as beautiful and historically rich as it is, holds tight to certain secrets, ones that don't show up on any map or pamphlet. That's all I've got, really. I'm not an expert on the supernatural or paranormal. I'm just a park ranger who stumbled onto something that defies rational thinking. Sharing it here is the closest I can get to peace of mind, hoping someone out there has seen something similar, or at least can assure me I'm not losing it. They say the roar of Niagara Falls can be heard for miles, a booming constant that draws tourists by the millions. But underneath that thunderous backdrop, there are pockets of eerie silence and dark corners where not every scream is drowned out. My name is Jared, and I'm a park ranger assigned to the Niagara Falls State Park region on the American side. Been here going on 5 years now. You'd be surprised at how busy we stay year-round, even in the colder months, dealing with everything from lost tourists to daring souls who want the perfect nighttime view of the illuminated falls. Normally, I just have to worry about folks testing the boundaries near the railing or sneaking onto slippery rocks for that perfect selfie. Never did I expect to encounter something that still haunts me every time I pass Prospect Point at dusk. About 2 weeks ago, I drew an evening shift, the type of schedule that usually ends with me walking through the park after most visitors have cleared out. It was close to 10 p.m. when I got a radio call from a local officer stationed near Goat Island, telling me someone reported hearing screams coming from the wooded area just south of Three Sisters Islands. Instinctively, I rolled my eyes, assuming it was probably a coyote or maybe a group of rowdy teenagers daring each other to wade in the shallow rapids. But the tone of the call unsettled me. There was a particular seriousness, like the officer had already tried to brush it off and couldn't. I headed that way, making a mental note to be extra careful. The rapids near Three Sisters can be deceptively dangerous, and it's not the first time we've had to rescue someone who lost their footing. By the time I got to the bridge that leads toward the islands, the night had taken on that strange quiet that sometimes settles here off-season. A swirling quiet, punctuated by the thunderous white noise of the falls in the distance. I shined my flashlight across the pathway, half expecting to see a raccoon or maybe an abandoned bag. Instead, the beam caught on something else, footprints in the mud, bigger than any I usually see from typical visitors. I paused, debating whether to radio this in, but decided to check out the surrounding woods first. As I ventured into the small cluster of trees just off the main path, the wind kicked up, rustling the leaves overhead. It was a clear night, so the moon lent enough glow for me to see outlines of tree trunks and brush. That's when I heard it. This faint, low wail that sent a chill right through my jacket. It wasn't the shriek of a coyote, or the muffled cry of a person injured. It was deeper, more drawn out, almost like the moan of something in pain, or anger. I'll admit, my heart pounded as I followed the sound further from the lit walkway. I eventually found a narrow, muddy trail that led me to the edge of the river, where the water churns in a powerful current before plummeting over the falls. The moonlight made everything glisten, and the constant roar of Niagara offered an uneasy soundtrack. Suddenly, another scream tore through the air, much closer this time. I nearly dropped my flashlight. By instinct, I called out, asking if someone needed help, but all I got in return was my own voice echoing back. I scanned the underbrush with my light. My beam fell upon a shape crouched against a fallen log, but it dashed out of sight before I could focus. I froze, trying to decide if I should follow it or call for backup. That's when a memory hit me. A coworker once told me about seeing tall, distorted figures scuttling near the gorge at night. They'd brushed it off as a trick of the eye, maybe shadows cast by the streetlights reflecting off the mist. But my gut told me something more was at play. I inched forward, shining the light between the trees, and stumbled upon what looked like drag marks in the damp soil, as though something had been pulled or had crawled. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up, and I found myself half hoping I'd spot a large, injured animal so I could rationalize everything. But the prints, the spacing, and the wailing sounds didn't fit any wildlife I knew. The further I went, the more it felt like I was heading into territory that wasn't meant for me. At one point, I swore I saw a faint figure, tall and hunched, maybe 20 yards away, moving in a lurching, unnatural manner between two large oaks. My flashlight battery started flickering at the worst possible time, forcing me to tap it to keep the beam steady. Every time the light flickered, my heart jumped. The figure seemed to vanish, only to reappear in a slightly different position, almost like it was deliberately staying on the edges of my vision. Then came the scream again. This time, it sounded like it was right behind me. I spun around so fast I lost my footing and slid on the wet leaves, landing hard enough to jolt my knee. The flashlight flew from my hand and rolled a few feet away. I scrambled for it, shining it wildly in all directions, expecting something to leap at me. Nothing did. But the feeling of being watched was so strong I could practically taste it. My radio crackled just then with the same officer's voice, asking if I'd found anything. I could barely speak, my chest tightening as if the presence in those woods was constricting the air around me. After a few shaky breaths, I managed to say that I hadn't found a person in distress, but that I did hear strange noises. I left out the part about the footprints and the hunched figure. I still couldn't wrap my head around that, and I knew how crazy it'd sound if I reported something so vague. I figured I could do a quick sweep and get the hell out of there, then come back with backup if needed. I pressed on for another 10 minutes, which felt like an hour, scanning the woods until I reached a small clearing closer to the water's edge. The lights from the Canadian side flickered across the river, giving the environment an almost surreal glow. Another shape darted across the clearing, fast, too fast to be human, but upright in a way that no animal around here normally moves. It let out that same unnerving scream, and I realized with horror that it was definitely no coyote. My entire body went numb, my instincts screaming at me to leave. Finally, I listened to them. I bolted toward the main path, gripping my flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. The whole time, I expected to feel something claw at my back or yank me to the ground. Once I reached the paved walkway, the floodlights and the distant hum of people still milling near the lit falls gave me a small measure of comfort. A family in matching jackets passed by, oblivious to the fear etched across my face. I didn't stop. I just made for the ranger station, my pulse pounding. Back inside, my coworker, Leslie, asked if I'd found the source of the screams. I just shrugged and muttered it might have been a false alarm. Leslie gave me this look that said they didn't buy it for a second. Later, when the station was emptier, Leslie admitted they'd heard rumors of something akin to a wendigo, or cryptid creature, rumored to roam the wooded pockets around the falls, especially off-season when fewer tourists are around. People talk about hearing horrifying shrieks at night, about seeing tall silhouettes slipping between trees along the gorge. Most chalk it up to local folklore, but you can't help but notice how the park seems to breathe differently in those hidden areas. How the wind can carry a scream further than you'd expect. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hunched shape and heard those cries echoing through my head. For days afterward, I avoided that section of the park after dark, making excuses to patrol in more crowded spots. I'm not entirely sure what I encountered, only that it wasn't something I could easily explain away. Some nights, I wonder if all the legends about creatures along the Niagara Gorge have more truth to them than we'd like to admit. I'm putting my story out here in the hope that if anyone else has come across these ungodly screams or seen that tall, fast-moving figure lurking in the trees, they'll know they're not alone. Niagara Falls State Park might be a tourist hotspot by day, but when the crowds disappear and the mist settles in, There are corners of it that feel like another world entirely. Even the mighty roar of the falls can't completely drown out the uncanny things that roam under the moonlight. If you happen to be near Three Sisters Islands and hear a scream that doesn't sound quite human, maybe think twice before charging into the dark, because sometimes you find answers you didn't want to find. There's a quiet stretch of coast along Fire Island National Seashore, off the southern shore of Long Island, New York, a place known for its calm bay waters, steady breezes, and the persistent call of seagulls overhead. But sometimes, what looks calm can turn unsettling, especially when you wander just beyond the familiar shoreline. My name's Mark, and I've been fishing these waters around Fire Island for a good part of 30 years. My usual routine involves launching my small skiff from Captree State Park, just across the bay from Fire Island. Sometimes, when I'm feeling adventurous, I'll slip in at Watch Hill or even take a ferry from Patchogue out to the Barrier Beach and wander the shore with my rod in hand. I've always had respect for this place. Anyone who knows Fire Island can tell you it's got a vibe all its own. But I never expected it to unnerve me the way it did last Tuesday. It started as just another early morning trip. I arrived around dawn, cutting my way through the chill and that faint smell of salt lingering in the air. I decided to try some surf casting along the beach near the Otis Pike High Dune Wilderness. People sometimes forget there's a whole stretch of relatively untouched shoreline there, and I like the solitude. I parked at the small lot near Watch Hill and trekked along the sand with my gear. It was quiet enough that I could hear my own breathing between the crashing waves. Nothing out of the ordinary, or so I thought. I'd been there maybe half an hour, tossing my lure into the surf, feeling that gentle tug of the current as it pulled the line. I got no bites, so I decided to move further down the beach. That's when I noticed something in the sand a little ways inland, near the foot of some dunes. From a distance, it looked like some scattered debris, maybe driftwood or garbage that had washed up. I grumbled to myself about people littering, deciding I might pick it up on my way back if it wasn't too big. But as I got closer, I saw tracks, big ones, spaced out in a weird pattern that made my heart skip a beat. I'm no expert tracker, unlike some folks I know who hunt in these parts, but I can generally tell a dog print from a deer or fox. These weren't like anything I'd seen before. Each print looked vaguely like a foot, but longer, narrower, and with toe marks that stretched into points. It was almost as if something had 3 or 4 elongated toes that dug into the sand, each leaving a distinct groove behind. I touched one of the prints just to confirm it wasn't some trick of the wind. The indent was deep and crisp, which meant it was fresh, likely made within the last few hours. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I realized just how big these tracks were, maybe 10 or 11 inches from heel to toe, if you could call it a heel. Now, I've fished a lot of places, Montauk, Shinnecock, even upstate in Lake Ontario, and I've encountered all sorts of wildlife, coyotes skulking around dunes, deer trotting across beaches, even the occasional seal. But this was different. As I scanned around, I noticed the prints seemed to run in a curving path, snaking away from the water's edge. I followed them about 100 yards, right up to where the dunes rose higher, scattered with beach grass. Then they stopped. It wasn't like they continued into the grass. It was as if whatever made them just vanished. There was no sign of scuffing, slipping, or footprints turning around. I kept thinking to myself, maybe it's a big dog with an injured paw, or maybe it's some local trickster wearing homemade plaster cast shoes. But I couldn't shake this heaviness in my gut that warned me something else was going on. The strangest part was how quiet everything got the minute I started examining those prints. No seagulls, no ocean breeze rattling the dune grass, no footsteps from other beachgoers. Just a tense, overwhelming silence, like the beach itself was holding its breath. After a while, I decided to poke around the dunes a bit, see if there was any sign of more prints. About 50 feet further, I found a dead horseshoe crab flipped on its back, shell cracked open. Normally, you'd blame seagulls or raccoons for messing with a beached crab, but the gouges in the shell looked almost too precise, as if carved by claws. I felt an unsettling chill creep up my spine. I'd heard local stories, people whispering about sightings of weird canine-like creatures or rumored cryptids near Fire Island Inlet. Usually, I'd roll my eyes at that kind of talk, but standing there staring at those bizarre prints and that torn-up crab, I started to wonder if maybe there was more truth to those rumors than I ever let myself believe. I could have gone further into the dunes, but a voice in my head said enough was enough. Besides, the sun was climbing, and if I was going to catch anything worth taking home, I needed to focus. So I returned to my spot, but my heart wasn't in it. I found myself scanning the beach every few minutes, half expecting to see something or someone watching me from behind a sandy ridge. I tried to chalk it all up to an overactive imagination, but that weird feeling never quite left. When I finally packed up, I ran into a young couple who'd come out for a morning walk. They asked if the fishing was any good, and I just shrugged and said it was slow. Part of me wanted to tell them about the tracks, but I was too spooked, afraid they might think I was trying to scare them. On the ferry ride back to Patchogue, I bumped into an older fisherman I recognized from the local marina. He noticed I was tense and asked if something happened on the beach. I mentioned finding strange prints, and he just nodded solemnly, mumbling about all the strange chatter around Fire Island, people claiming they've heard howls at night or found shredded remains of fish way up in the dunes. He didn't elaborate much, but that nod spoke volumes. I keep replaying it in my head, how those tracks ended so abruptly, how the crab shell was gouged clean. It's not the sort of thing you can just forget overnight. Since then, I've heard from a friend who surfs near the Fire Island lighthouse that he saw something dart across the sand one evening, a tall shape that didn't move like a dog or a deer. He never got close, but he swears it was gone in a blink, and the footprints it left behind looked vaguely similar to what I described. I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but this experience rattled me good. It's a big world, and even in places as familiar as Fire Island, there may be corners that hold more mystery than we realize. If I've learned anything, it's that the beach can be downright eerie when you venture off the beaten path. And so, another strange encounter fades away. A trick of the mind, or something far more unsettling. That's for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching my stories. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is what keeps this channel going.